The American College of Radiology.
Focused. Forward.
Together.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Monica Wood. I'm a diagnostic radiologist and vice chair of the RAN. I will be co-moderating this evening's webinar with Dr. Connie Liu, who serves as the ACR RFS Advocacy Liaison. Tonight, we welcome an esteemed group of physicians and ACR members who are also leaders within the American Medical Association. We look forward to hearing about their advocacy and leadership experience within the AMA. So without further ado, we will invite our panelists to briefly introduce themselves, starting with Dr. Anderson.
Thank you, Monica, for the invitation. My name is Jade Anderson. I am a first-year attending musculoskeletal imaging and intervention at University of Wisconsin-Madison. I have been involved in the AMA since I was a medical student. My first year, and that was in 2011, and I went to my first annual AMA meeting in 2012, and I haven't looked back since. My current role, do we talk about current roles now, or do you want us to talk about that later?
We can just do introductions now, and then you can delve into it a little bit later. Thank you so much, Dr. Anderson. Dr. Brown?
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Anna Brown. I'm a radiation oncologist in community practice in central Wisconsin. I've been involved with the AMA since 2012. Really excited to be here tonight. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Thank you. Dr. Ding.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here with all of you. I'm Alex Ding, a body imager and interventional radiologist in academic practice at the University of Louisville. In addition to my clinical work, I'm the Associate Vice President for Physician Strategy and Medical Affairs at Humana, where my team and I focus on physician engagement, empowerment, advocacy, and wellness, and the advancement of value-based care. I've been involved with the AMA since 2002.
Wonderful. Thank you. Dr. Ma?
Hi, I'm Lorelei Ma. Thanks a lot for having me this evening. I'm really excited to be here. I'm a community-based radiologist practicing in the Baltimore suburbs, and I have been a member of the AMA since medical school, which is in 1987, but I actually became involved in the AMA more since 2013.
Great, thank you so much. And Dr. Silva?
Yeah, thanks for the invitation to be here. Thank you. Yeah, my name is Zeke Silva. I'm a diagnostic and interventional radiologist in private practice in San Antonio, Texas, part of about an 85-person group. And I've been a member of the AMA since medical school as well. My first active engagement with the AMA was in the early 2000s, and really looking forward to talk about my roles and other parts of the AMA that we can all contribute to. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your insights with us. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Liu to get us started with our conversation.
Yeah, I'm very excited to hear from everyone. We have a great group of people tonight. The first question I'm going to start off with is, could you speak about the governance and advocacy structure of the AMA?
Sure, I could start off with that one. The AMA is a very complex organization, just as the ACR is. The organization is run by an executive vice president and CEO who manages the work of over 1,100 staff members who execute on the policy that's set by a House of Delegates and the strategy that is set by the Board of Trustees. So the oversight, fiduciary responsibility, direction, and overall strategy of the organization are set by its Board of Trustees, which are elected by the House of Delegates. One of the interesting aspects of the board role is that they also function as spokespersons for the organization and the profession at large. Now, the House of Delegates is represented by delegations and delegates from all across medicine. We kind of think of it as Medicine's Congress. So you've got state specialties, subspecialties, interest groups, all represented within the House of Delegates. They set the policy of the organization, which then drives the advocacy work. The House also elects its leaders to councils on various different issues, kind of like the ACR commissions is the analogy I would use. And then all within that, we've got sections that are based on various demographics, like the resident fellow section, the private practice physician section, minority affairs consortium. They've all got their own programming, their own governance, and send representation to the House of Delegates as well. Now, the organization is deeply embedded in the infrastructure of medicine. And so as part of its organization also has these quasi-independent arm's length parts of the organization that are kind of a little bit separated from the politics of the House. So you've got the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, the CPT and the RUC, and then the AMA also appoints representatives to various other organizations across medicine, like the the residency review committees and the Joint Commission, just as some examples.
Yeah, and this is Zeke Sullivan. I mean, that was an excellent summary. And Alex mentioned sort of the arm's length, or at least the relationship separate of CPT and the RUC. And I like to talk about those two because both of those are very important areas where the ACR contributes meaningfully and has historically been a strong presence. But CPT is within the sort of broader AMA umbrella, if you will, its own separate entity, if you will. It's its own separate organizational structure, and it sort of functions independently. When you think about why that's necessary, is CPT's role is describing a medical nomenclature for the entire house of medicine, and even outside of physician services into non-physician practitioners as well. So it's really important that that body is able to act independently and objectively. We're going to talk a bit later, I would predict, about the sort of advocacy arm that is the AMA. You think about our congressional relationships, but one place where I spend a lot of my time, and we'll talk about our individual role shortly, but is in the RUC, the RBS Update Committee. That's actually separate from CPT, but it does fall under advocacy and is a separate organizational structure from the Board of Trustees and the House of Delegates. But I will say that CPT and the RUC listen intently to what the House of Delegates and unquestionably what the board says as far as what our activities are. And then Alex mentioned JAMA. JAMA is completely even more independent. And sort of the example I use is, well, I'll tell you, I'm chair of the RUC. So JAMA actually has published recently articles that at some level were sort of critical of the RUC. And that shows how independent that entity is, that it's important that it's able to do that. And that's exactly how it should be. And it's exactly what we should embrace. Thank you.
Thank you. It seems like there's a lot of different ways to get involved with the AMA. So would like to give a chance for the other panelists to talk about what your current and past roles in the AMA have been.
I can jump in. I came into the AMA, like I said, a little bit later in my career in 2013, and I came in actually because of things actually with the ACR and at my Medical State Society. I was on the council steering committee for the ACR, and somebody came from the ACR delegation to actually speak to us because they said that it was important what we did in radiology and the advocacy that we did, but that we needed more radiologists to really be out there in terms of, the whole house of medicine, and they wanted us to get involved in the AMA. And having been involved in my state medical society, I think at that point, I was just coming up on becoming my county medical society president. I decided I was going to try to run for the AMA delegation. I thought that would be a good idea, and it would be a way for me to sort of get, my feet wet in it. And I didn't get it the first time to get to be an alternate delegate for Maryland, but the second time I ran, I was able to become an alternate delegate. And since that time, it's been a really very interesting to see all the different, opinions in medicine, the medical students, the residents, the young physicians, and then, the older physicians as well, and all of the different specialties. And what I've also found interesting is that I have my own state delegation, which is really important. I'm very, very loyal to them. But that when I'm at the AMA, I'm also a radiologist. And so we're part of the Radiology Section Council. And I became an officer in the Radiology Section Council. And then over time, just recently, this last year, I became chair of the Radiology Section Council. And I think that's actually wonderful because we have radiologists who are from different states, and they're part of their state delegations. And then we also have radiologists who are ACR delegates, RSNA delegates, ASNR delegates, SIR delegates, and radiation oncology, nuclear medicine, and all of it. And so I think it's been really neat to have that kind of like a crossroads. And I think that's been very interesting. And I really have learned to love the AMA because of that. And I think it's been really important.
I see Jade with her hand up, so I'll pass it to her.
Thank you, Connie. So again, to backtrack a little bit, I basically, got involved with the AMA doing the medical student organization fair that they had for us, like the second week of medical school. And they had posters for each organization. And, they told me about advocacy. They told me what they were doing and attending the interim and the annual meetings and about health policy. But honestly, what really caught my eye and what I noticed was that there weren't any really underrepresented minorities or people that looked like me in the photos, the advertisements that they were posting from the AMA. And I thought to myself, how can someone make policy regarding people that look like me without having that perspective from people that look like me? And so I basically promptly joined and I haven't looked back. So in order to have a voice, you need to have a seat at the table. And I see, a lot of people complain about things without taking the initiative or the action to do anything about it. And this is what advocacy means. You need to be involved, but you also need to stay involved. So I'm really heavy on trying to recruit members, to the AMA, because membership is what changes. People's perspectives and having those relationships. I've been involved in multiple capacities since I was a medical student, but most recently I've served on multiple reference committees at both the annual and interim meetings. I've served on the resident and fellow section and state committees. I have been a delegate and alternate delegate for the resident and fellow section, but I'm with Lorelei, actually. I'm in my second term on the radiology section council as the RFS member at large, which I'm finishing up at the annual meeting. So that's my involvement so far.
Next up, we have Anna.
All right, thanks, Connie. So I can go next. Just talking about my involvement with the AMA. It's actually been a little bit different pathway than for others. I actually did quite a bit of radiology research, including for a master's degree before I started medical school. So I also got involved during my first year of medical school, but went to the interim meeting actually in Hawaii that year to present some radiology research, and then really found out about a lot of the roots for advocacy and that type of work. Really kind of became involved more at the state level with the North Carolina Medical Society, kind of more local medical societies within medical school. And then in residency, was elected to the role of the resident and fellow representative for the women's physician section. And I've stayed involved with the WPS as the alternate delegate. So that's my current role. And it's been really interesting kind of over the years to see how, really building coalitions and seeing how, radiologists as well as radiation oncologists, my specialty, and other specialties with similar interests, how we can all work together to help advocate for our fields.
That's wonderful. Thank you all so much for sharing that. And, I was curious as to kind of how and why you started getting involved, and you've all touched on that, which is awesome. I'm also curious to hear, what are some things about the AMA that have kept you involved over the years, especially the folks who have been part of the AMA for many years? What are some motivating factors for you to have spent so many years, so many meetings, plugging away at it? Let us know what has, kept you so passionate about the AMA. Please, Zeke, go ahead.
Yeah, I love the question. And Alex and I did the introduction. We didn't really have a chance to tell our exact roles. So I'm going to answer that question and transition to it now by telling a couple of the roles that I have within the AMA. And I very much came into the AMA through initially through the SIR. I was doing CPT work for the SIR in the early 2000s. And then I transitioned doing more evaluation work for the ACR at the RVS Update Committee, the RUC. And then I eventually went on to the RUC and became RUC chair. And then along the way became part of the Texas delegation, much like Lorelei described, where I ran for an alternate delegate position before the entire Texas Medical Association House of Delegates. And that's been my role in the House of Delegates. But I say both of those roles because one thing that's been very important to me as someone that contributes to the AMA is being a bridge between what happens on the payment side with the RUC and what the needs of members of the House of Delegates are. Because even though we've already described that they're separate, by definition, they're very much interrelated. We can't do what we do at the RUC without physician input, even as granular as physician surveys. But I think even more importantly, without really understanding the challenges of physicians and what the advocacy needs of physicians are, and how we can play a role in sort of bridging those needs at both the national, but frankly at the local level. And like Lorelei, I'm actually president of my county medical society, and I love the local sort of organic, doc next door kind of feel that we have in the local community. But everything that happens locally matters nationally and vice versa. So all those bi-directional relationships are very important to me and something I find very rewarding with the AMA.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Lorelei?
Thank you. One of the things I really love about the AMA is hearing everybody's voice. And what I mean by that is that, in radiology and radiation oncology, we have our opinions about, medicine and different, issues. But when you hear the family practice doctors, or you hear, the surgeons, or, any of the different groups, you really get their point of view. And you're not in an echo chamber then. You really are learning about the whole house of medicine. And what's been very nice is that we have more commonalities than we have differences. And so many times we're fighting for the same things, whether it's scope of practice or fair physician payment or, better graduate medical education slots. Those are things we all want. And so our bigger voice together is much more effective on Capitol Hill than just our single voices as specialties, although those are also very important. But the idea of the synergy of all of it is great. The other thing is sometimes you hear an appointment and an opinion that you don't like. You hear something that's like, oh, I didn't think of that, or I don't agree with that. But that's okay. That's a start of a conversation. And usually, in the end, you can find consensus, or at least you can agree to disagree. And I really do like that about the AMA.
That's a really nice point. Thank you. Alex?
Yeah, I thought I'd take a chance to talk a little bit about my experience and what's kept me involved. So I'm currently an elected member of the AMA's Board of Trustees. In the past, I've served on the Council on Science and Public Health, including as the chair during the height of the pandemic, and have been a member of the House of Delegates in various different delegations over the years, including through 2 different state delegations and as a member of the ACR's delegation as well. I've worked my way through the medical student section, the resident fellow section, the young physician section. And for me, it started 20 plus years ago because of advocacy on a specific issue, which was student debt. And at that time, the AMA and really kind of the larger organized medicine didn't recognize the issue of student debt to the extent that we do now. And I'd like to think my advocacy had something to do with getting the ball rolling there. So I wrote a resolution that went through the medical student section, then through the House of Delegates, ended up becoming AMA policy. Then I had a chance to co-author AMA's white paper on student debt, and then got to testify before the U.S. Department of Education on behalf of the AMA. And for me, it was just through that process, I recognized, what a process it was, but it was also the ability to really increase and scale my impact, which was just so much bigger than me as an individual. I just loved the opportunity to advocate and speak for my colleagues. I really felt like I was a part of the profession. And I really think that advocacy work should be considered being a part of being a profession or being a professional. I think it's an important part of what you think about when you're thinking about being a professional, which is both the self-governance side of being a professional, but I would say also the self-advocacy piece of it as well.
That's great. Thank you so much. Jade, I saw you had a hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I echo what everyone has actually said. I also enjoy those aspects of the AMA that has been stated, but I also kind of wanted to add just a quick note about the educational aspect that it provides. I mean, me personally, for myself, I like to work in the background, and I specifically volunteer to do the policy reviews. People write policy. This is what we want to talk about. This is what we want to change. And there's so much there that I would have had no idea about. And I'm learning about all of these different segments of the way we're getting involved as physicians in the healthcare space or health policy space, what's going on in government, what's going on in the medical education side. So for me, I also use it as a learning opportunity to kind of understand what's currently happening across the nation for us.
Thank you. A lot of wonderful reasons to stay involved and very inspirational to hear all of your perspectives and how you got started in the organization and the various things that have kept you involved. That's awesome. I'm going to turn it over to Connie for the next question.
Yeah, it's great hearing all these things that people are passionate about, having gotten to be a part of it in the AMA. I think kind of bringing the question a little bit back, but what is the value of the AMA to radiologists and radiation oncologists? I think maybe we'll start with Lorelei.
Thanks. I got my hand up faster than anybody else, right? So I think it's really important that you're at the table, because if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, and I think it's very important, because if you're not there in the House of Medicine when they are looking at resolutions that can affect your field of endeavor, whether or not it was meant to affect it or if it's just a side thing that affects it, if you're not there to give them that viewpoint about why this might not be a good resolution from your point of view or for your patients, who's going to be there to do it? At the same time, when there are things that you agree on, you could even give more power to the ideas, whether it's, scope, or whether it's payment, or whether it's, something else completely, but you find synergies on that. So I think that's really important. And I think that's for radiology, for radiation oncology. We know what's important to us, but we also have to make sure everybody knows what's important to us. At the same time, sometimes you find that there's going to be a resolution that you didn't even realize would be important to you, and it is. And so I think those are the things that are surprising about the AMA that are very important for us to be there for.
Great perspective on being there to provide perspective. Next, we'll have Anna.
Thanks. Yeah, so I echo a lot of what Lorelei stated. I think really important to have a seat at the table, and just adding to that, for radiation oncology, which is a much smaller field than radiology and really than a lot of kind of other specialties out there, really important for us to share our perspective and to really learn from others who we interact with. So everything from the Radiology Section Council to the Cancer Care Caucus, to various state and other specialty organizations within the AMA. Really important that it's a really important way to help amplify our impact. I've been involved with advocacy efforts within kind of local or more specialty organizations for radiation oncology like ASTRO and ACRO. And while those have a really important impact, it's still a much smaller voice compared to, when we think about the AMA as a whole, it's really the largest body of organized medicine. So I think there's definitely a duality and a give and take where the AMA can help amplify our impact from the radiation oncology perspective. And we can also help out with other specialties who are facing similar like scope of practice or other issues, as Lorelei had mentioned as well. Thanks.
Like that perspective about amplifying and also supporting others. Next, we'll have Alex.
Yeah, and I also want to kind of double down on the idea of amplifying your voice. I think that there are certainly things that are specific to our field in radiology and radiation oncology, but I do think there are a lot of things that are similar to all of us as physicians. Things like burnout, things like student debt, as I mentioned earlier, Medicare payment, administrative barriers. And I think the ability to work in the AMA really allows for coalition building. It gives us strength in numbers. It makes us stronger together, and particularly so when we're united. I think it allows us to scale our voice and our impact. And so I think the ACR itself can do a lot, but we are one of many, many medical organizations. And so how do we make sure that our voice isn't drowned out? Or, one thing we often see politicians do is they divide and conquer physicians because there are so many different organizations. And so I think we need to use the AMA as that convener, that coordinator, that consensus builder to help physicians speak with one voice, because I think it makes us that much more effective then. And I would just say that, I think it's important that we're there with all of the other physicians so they really consider us as their colleagues. Do we want to just consider ourselves as radiologists who are off in our own corner, or are we kind of part of the whole physician community? And more importantly, I would say, do we want our colleagues to consider us as their peer? Or, I would worry that they just think we are off in some dark corner where an answer box lives, and it could be a person that's a radiologist. At some point, it could be an AI bot. And I think if we're not there in person at the table, I'm concerned that they would think more the latter than the former.
A lot about being united and having colleagues in medicine. Next, we'll have Zeke. I think you're still muted.
I want to build on what Alex just said in one way, and then sort of make a separate but related point. Yeah, I remember because I grew up in the ACR and the SIR, and I remember when I was first in the House of Delegates, I'm just going to admit I was just a little nervous of what I thought how they perceived radiologists, and they really think we're pretty cool. Like, we have this whole technology side to us. They all work with us on a daily basis. They really value the perspectives we bring. And so, for example, in my case, I had a lot of experience building regulatory parameters around teleradiology, and I was able to bring that into the AMA regarding some of their telehealth, telemedicine expansions. And that's just one example. Even going back to sort of the RBRBS, a lot of people don't know that radiology had actually created the original RBS system for the Champus system back in the late 80s. That subsequently became essentially the model for what we now think of as the framework for the Medicare physician fee schedule. But on a sort of separate note, I want to make this point because this is really important to me, because we see this at the ACR Council. We see this within our own state houses of delegates, respectively. And it's unquestionably true at the AMA is any member of the House of Delegates, or even an alternate, just a member of a delegation can bring forth any resolution that they want. They can come to the body and say, I have this idea. This is what I think policy should be. And even if that is, by maybe objective metrics, completely unrealistic and not practical, they're going to get a voice. They're going to have the opportunity to present their idea. It may not carry the day. It may not be voted into policy. It may not make it to the floor at all, but it will be heard. And I think that's kind of the root of democracy at a very basic level, is the ability to see something. And I'm a big local to national guy, so to be able to see something locally, see something within your own practice, and know that you have a defined mechanism to translate that voice into policy to be heard by others, I think is really powerful. Thank you.
Yes, the opportunity to be able to bring up our voice to a greater house of medicine. Jade, did you want to speak? Your hand was up briefly. Okay.
Keep putting it down. So I agree with, again, everything that everyone has previously stated, especially having a seat at the table, having that influence. Aside from that, though, I do want to also reiterate, not only what is the value of the AMA to us, but what can we provide as a value to the AMA. And again, there is that opportunity, aside from voting for AMA policies, there's that opportunity for leadership within the AMA. This is the biggest national medical organization in the United States, right? We can be involved in the CPT code review, in the RVU review process via the RUC. I mean, we have Zeke right here. He's the chair of the RUC right now. We have 2 radiologists serving on the AMA Board of Trustees, 2 radiologists / radiation oncologists, serving on AMA councils, and 4 running for AMA council positions in 2024. So I don't want to, think about the power that we have and what we represent and bring to the table as well.
Yeah, it's a great space to be able to make a lot of difference and represent radiology.
Real quick point, we have 2 radiologists on the CPT editorial panel as well, Dan Pikus and Tim Swan. So it just shows, again, they think we're cool. Like they really value the contributions radiologists make. It's a great point, Jade.
That's a great segue to what I was going to ask. Obviously you have all touched upon different ways that the AMA can be of value to radiologists and radiation oncologists. Now, what can everyday physicians in our specialties do to engage with the AMA? We may have individually different interests and different bandwidth, but I think we're all united in, some of the things you've already mentioned. What are some specific ways that people can volunteer and engage with the AMA? I think Jade has started to name a few things. I would love for some of you to delve into some specific details and give us some ideas. Alex, I see your hand up first. Would you like to?
Sure, I can start this one off. Well, I certainly think that there's opportunity to engage at the national level with the AMA. There are a lot of different affiliation groups based on kind of your stage in your career, demographics, modes of practice. But the message I would really carry here is that it's just important to engage with your professional association and to really see advocacy as I would consider a professional duty. And so that, of course, means membership in your state and your county medical associations with the ACR, obviously, and with the AMA as well. And I want to go back to a point that Zeke and Lorelei made, which is getting involved at the local level. I think the state and the county medical societies are a great way to engage with professional associations on issues that are probably more germane to your local practices. I think it's a great networking opportunity. It's easier to get on the leadership track there. And then I think there's the additional benefit that Lorelei alluded to earlier, which is the added benefit of getting radiologists and radiation oncologists kind of getting their leadership into general medicine organizations and getting us to be seen as kind of an integral part of the physician community. And I think for us, it's really been a successful strategy to getting radiology issues having more support by having radiology leaders in state societies and in state delegations that then go to the AMA. And then we then coordinate those efforts through the Radiology Section Council, which Lorelei leads. And I think for us, it's really been a winning strategy for us in figuring out how do we kind of scale our impact and our influence well beyond the small size of our specialty. And as people have mentioned, we have a lot of leaders in a lot of different places in the AMA, and I think it's really helped us to punch above our weight.
Thank you. That's very helpful to know that there are many opportunities to be involved, to be in leadership, to have influence starting from our local communities and working our way to the AMA if we're interested in doing that. Lorelei, please go ahead.
Yeah. And actually, it's interesting that Alex brought that up, and because it was what I was going to bring up in a little bit more detailed way, in the sense that, like in our state society, if you're a part of, like, say, the Baltimore County Medical Association, right? And then you're part of MedChi, which is the Maryland State Medical Society, you can bring a resolution to the MedChi House of Delegates, right? And so if the MedChi House of Delegates then votes that that is a reasonable resolution, then what ends up happening is that goes then to the AMA. Actually, if it gets voted in, then we have to actually bring that as a resolution to the AMA. And we do that if all the state societies do that. And so you can get involved on your local level, right, just from your Baltimore, from your county medical society. So it's actually interesting how there are so many different routes. You can do it through your specialty society. You can do it through the MSS, the RFS, the YPS, but you can also do it even just from if you're not a delegate at the AMA, through your county medical societies and state medical societies, you can get ideas through. And some of those ideas have been very important ideas that came from people who were experiencing it at the ground level, boots on the ground, having a problem and getting that problem addressed.
Thank you. Yeah, it often starts with experiencing a problem or an issue ourselves and being motivated to bring that forward, and now seeing at a larger stage that a lot of our colleagues are maybe experiencing the same thing and working together towards a solution. Would anyone else like to discuss some ways that radiation oncologists and radiologists can engage with the AMA or different advocacy organizations?
I would say, I'm sorry, Anna.
Oh, sorry, you can go ahead. I'll go next.
I was just going to say that whether it's your state medical society or your radiological society of your state, just fill out the volunteer form. First, join, be a member. Second, fill out the volunteer form, because there's always a need for volunteers and they will find a space for you. And that was my only comment.
That's great. Be a member. That's a good message. Thank you. Anna, you're next.
Yes, I would second that. I think, being a member of for radiation oncologists, our specialty societies, but as well as the AMA, the more membership, representation that we have within the AMA, the more House of Delegates representatives we can have. So that's really important. Just kind of showing up is the first step, and then volunteering to get more involved. Leadership opportunities sometimes happen kind of organically after that. If you're consistent with showing up and volunteering. So yeah, I would say, that's really the first step in getting started.
That's great. Thank you. And Zeke?
So I think it's fair to point out that, it is a pretty significant time commitment. And I say that for involvement with the ACR, with the AMA. I mean, every individual organization and title that's been described in this webinar by definition requires some time. So I think, it does take sort of an internal focus, if you will, or commitment, if you will, to do this. I remember I had a conversation with Paul Ellenbogen, who's from Texas. He's a past board chair for the ACR. And we're both in private practice in Texas. And we were both commenting that we use a lot of our vacation time to go to these meetings. And Paul made the point, he said, I love these meetings. I'd rather be here on vacation than I would be on a beach somewhere. And it really, when it becomes a part of you and you really feel yourself drawn to it and you start to see the contributions that you make. And if you're really fortunate, like I am, you have a practice that not just supports your activities, but invests in your activities, it really becomes something that is quite achievable, even for a very busy physician like many of us on this webinar tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. And Lorelei?
And I just wanted to make one small point, since I already said something about this question, but I think it's important even more for radiology than it is for many other specialties, because a lot of people just don't know what we do, right? We are back in that dark room. And that's why I made the comment about if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, because they know what a surgeon does. They know what a cardiologist does, but a lot of people just don't know what a radiologist does, or, the important things that we do and radiation oncologists do in evaluating images, evaluating therapies. And because they don't know it, if we're not there to tell them, they assume things that, are often not true. And so I think it's very important that they realize how central we are, to patient care.
That's an excellent point. Thank you for that. And I'm going to turn it over to Connie for the next question.
Okay, for our next question, for current YPS members, so I think we could also just expand it to everyone who has been involved in the AMA early on in your career. How has your involvement impacted your early career trajectory and development? And maybe also adding another question, since Zeke talked about the commitment, the time commitment, how has you been able to balance that out? Starting with Jade.
I didn't lower my hand. So I am newly minted to the YPS, so I'm very early career and trajectory. But I would say honestly, the AMA has impacted my development for sure. I understand kind of how healthcare policy is formed from start to finish. This experience basically over the years has allowed me to be a successful advocate for other things in my life, including other groups that I'm in. It's taught me those skills to strategically understand basically how to get things accomplished, especially in some hierarchical environments that we are in. So I think that the AMA has definitely influenced me from that standpoint. And then Connie, what was the second part of your question?
With the time commitment component, how do you balance it out with, your clinical duties?
So I am academic at University of Wisconsin, and I think, finding your culture and your environment is very important. And I love the culture of my department. And so, it starts from leadership up. Our chairman actually pays for our membership to the ACR. He also pays for our membership to, big groups such as the RSNA for the entire department. So that monetary, support is very, very helpful in keeping us of those are involved here, because he understands how important it is to be involved in these spaces. So I really appreciate that from my own department. And also we have again, I'm speaking just for UW, we actually have 15 meeting presenting days plus 15 meeting attending days. That's an extra 6 weeks because they want you to be involved. And so I use my meeting attending days now to be able to go to these AMA meetings. That is not for my vacation. Previously, I've always had to use vacation. So just having those, again, those things in place, and structurally how it's set up in your department is, I think, very important. You can see the support.
It's great that your department is supporting you. Is there anyone else? Lorelai?
Well, I think in private practice, it's a little bit hit or miss. I had to work at first to convince people that what we were doing is important, that what we did at the state and the national level did impact radiology and medicine, and that it was worthwhile. And I think there were a few key wins we had early on in the state of Maryland and nationally that helped our private practice to realize that, yes, it is worth it. And so they do give time for it now. Well, they give some time for it, some corporate days, but, obviously they, allow me in my schedule to say, no, I can't do something that day, or those are the days I have to be at the AMA or the ACR. And I'm allowed to have, that time, and I'm given the time that I can block things basically. And I think that's important, but it took some time. Our group does pay for ACR membership, and for MedChi membership. And so we, do have, all of that covered, which is actually nice, and enough to pay for RSNA membership as well. So that is pretty good for a 100-person group. I'm happy with what we've gained. We've had to, to ask to get there, but if you don't ask, you'll never get anything.
Important thing to remember. And next, Alex.
I think this is a great question. I do think that younger physicians are maybe thinking a little bit more, or thinking a little bit differently about their career growth. And so, I think there is actually a lot of career development opportunity, more than I ever would have recognized when I started off in organized medicine and organized radiology. For one, it's taught me to be a better public speaker. It's helped me to understand how to manage through influence and not having direct control. It's helped me to understand how to build coalitions and to be able to serve multiple stakeholders. It's taught me how to negotiate. All of these are soft skills that I think are critical to advancing in leadership that aren't necessarily learned or taught in medical school or residency. And I learned a lot of these early on in my professional career because of my involvement. And not to mention, I think it's a great way to develop a fantastic network of great colleagues that really become some great friends over the years. And I would say that kind of all of this has helped me get to the position that I'm currently in. And I would say, for me, developmentally has been as valuable, if not more, than getting an MBA or an MPH. And to get to the second part of the question about time commitment, I do think that the time commitment can be significant, which can be particularly hard in clinical practice, especially as you're starting out with either a young family or starting off early career. But I also just want to say that it can also be dependent on what you can offer, especially at the local level. It can expand as you want, or as you're interested, or as you're able. But even if you're able to offer just a small amount of time, your professional society would very, very much appreciate that. So don't let that time commitment aspect of it kind of deter you from learning more and volunteering.
Thank you. And Zeke.
Yeah, I love going after Alex and building on his points, because the network point is really important. And when we talk about sort of our networks as we've been doing this for longer, I love this sort of concept that I talk about as sort of an organic network. It's not as though I was having to pick up the phone or go on LinkedIn and find friends. I mean, I've built these relationships through working together. Or, I often talk about, what happens at the AMA meeting in the ballroom at the House of Delegates is really important. I mean, that's formal policy. But I would argue what's even more important is what happens in the hallways, or what happens over breakfast, or what happens, if we're lucky, at the end of the day over a glass of wine, where we have a chance to really share ideas and get to know people at a very personal level. And these are people that you'll see, that we see. I've been seeing the same individuals for 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, I've watched their children grow up and now they're in college and now there are some of them physicians themselves, which just says how old I am, but that's a different story. But it really shows you just how that organic network develops and how powerful and important those relationships become to all of us as physicians.
See ya, Anna.
Yeah, so I agree with a lot of the points that have already been discussed, so I won't belabor those, but I just add that one of the really valuable aspects of the AMA, I think, especially in like as narrow a field as radiation oncology, has been to really maintain a broad perspective, throughout education. Really, I felt like my, field of view has kind of gotten more and more narrow as I've focused on, of course, there's a lot, within radiation oncology to learn and kind of all of the, clinical aspects, but it's been, really valuable now for over a decade, kind of keeping that broad perspective on what's relevant to the House of Medicine, and especially from, not just, financial aspects, but there's always resolutions, on like climate change, really thinking about these kind of global perspectives. And at our most recent meeting, a lot of resolutions came forward about like Medicaid and thinking about how that impacts pediatric patients. So really just keeping that kind of broad view of issues that are important to, all of us within the House of Medicine, within society. I think it's really important. It is a time investment, but I think that definitely worthwhile to make sure that we're kind of addressing the most relevant issues of the day.
Thank you all. I'm going to throw it back to Monica.
Yes, this was fantastic. We're coming up to the end of the time that we have. So I want to thank each and every single one of you for taking the time to share your insights and perspectives today. We've all learned a lot and are, I think, inspired to get involved more at different levels, starting from our local medical societies and all the way to AMA, so that we can bring the voice of radiation oncologists and radiologists to the House of Medicine, learn from our colleagues, and expand our networks and continue to work together towards our common goals. I think that we will project this slide with an email, so people can feel free to send in questions if they would like to the panel. And again, thank you all so much for taking the time to be here this evening.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Good to see everyone.